Good evening, Dr. Nelson. Thank you for making the opportunity to interview for the Black Male Professors interview series. I'm very honored to have the opportunity to speak with you as a mentor and colleague and to learn more about your journey to your current position at Yale. So I'll now ask you to introduce yourself because I cannot do it better than you can. And then after that, I would love to delve into some questions that will talk about help the audience learn more about who you are and how you reach where you are.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Donaldson. Hey, everybody, I'm LaRon Nelson. I am the Independence Foundation Associate Professor of Nursing at Yale, where I'm also Associate Dean of Global Affairs at Planetary Health. My clinical background is in nursing. I'm a family nurse practitioner, and my work focuses on HIV prevention globally. Much of that has been in the African diasporas of Canada and United States, but also some work probably for the last 15 years in Ghana, West Africa. So yeah, been around for a while.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction of yourself. And my name is Donaldson Conserve, and I'm an associate professor at George Washington University and also the founder for the Black Male Professors and Researchers Collective. And our purpose is to really showcase the amazing work that so many Black male professors are doing in different spaces. So now, Dr. Nelson, I would like for you to take us back, before you even thought about going for a PhD and share with us how you became interested in just research in general. Like what did research mean to you at that time in your journey personally?
I don't know if I had any moment where I thought research was it for me. I certainly did not have a family background in any type of sciences. I think it was, so as I mentioned, I'm a nurse. I think it was a point where I was seeing things in clinic that I couldn't understand, right? I needed answers. And they were not answers. I couldn't find them in the literature. And someone suggested to me, well, you should go study it yourself. But it was this idea that there were these things I wanted to know, and I couldn't find answers to them. And so I decided I'll just study it myself. And I didn't know what that meant in terms of a research career, but I knew the questions that were plaguing my head. And, so I started a PhD program, which in the process, I learned how to, be more precise in how I conceptualize the question and understand different methods that I might be able to use to investigate that question. But it was really born sort of grounded in my clinical practice and running up against these questions that I thought were important and needed to be answered. And they hadn't been answered yet at that point.
Thank you. So I will now ask if you can share how many years had you been a nurse before you started having those questions, and what were those actual questions you were, if you can share some examples that led you to, go for a PhD.
I think I'd only been a nurse for about 4 months. 4 months. Yeah, and so I was in clinic, and I worked in a sexual health clinic. They called them STD clinics back in the day, but now they call sexual health clinics. And it's a clinic where this is a public health clinic, and it's a place where people come to be screened for sexually transmitted infections, either because they had symptoms or they had an exposure and they just wanted, whatever. But so I had these girls who would come in for screening. And, part of the question you ask them if they think they have an STI or they think they've been potentially exposed is about their condom use behavior. So use condoms, use them always, sometimes, never. And I kept noticing that girls, when I say girls, I mean like they're not 18, they're like 15, 16, 17. Girls who had babies already at that age were giving me this peculiar answer, which was, Well, I use them sometimes, or I use them most of the time, except with the father of my child. And I was like, okay. The first couple of times you hear it is just an answer. You write it in the chart, you keep moving. But I kept hearing it, and I kept hearing it. I'm on this very particular sort of type of patient, this profile of patient. So I wanted to understand why are they giving me this answer that other women don't give? And so I went to look it up. I mean, I looked up, it was a question about condom use behaviors, differences in condom use behaviors. And what I had found at the time was that girls, adolescent girls, were more likely to use condoms with a casual partner, somebody they met recently or a one night stand or whatever. They were more likely to use condoms with a casual partner than with the main partner, which is like a boyfriend, somebody that they have steady, ongoing relationship with. And so, okay, that made sense to me. But then when I sort of took this back to clinic and sort of asked more questions, it turned out that the boyfriend, the guy they were using, that they were not using condoms with, the father of their kid, was not the main partner, right? Some of these girls had boyfriends. So I was like, well, this doesn't make sense. The literature says if it's the main partner, they might not use condoms, or they're less likely to use condoms compared to a casual partner. But these girls are consistently saying they don't use condoms, the father of their kid, and he's not the main partner. They're very clear they're not in a relationship. He might have another girlfriend, they might have another boyfriend, but they're not using condoms together. So there was this gap for me. I want to understand, what is it about this guy? What is it about this father of the kid that sort of influenced girls to not use condoms? Because they knew how to use condoms, because they were saying, I use them sometimes, or most of the times, with these other people. So the literature, there was this gap where I was like, I don't know what to say, but this phenomenon is not random. I can always almost predict what the girl is going to say at this point. And I wanted to understand how best to advise them clinically, because I knew there was this behavior and it was associated with this particular type of partner. But the literature didn't talk about fathers of the kids. They talked about main partners and casual partners. And the girls I was seeing were dealing with something different than that.
So it was a bit more nuanced than what the literature had at the time. And I also, actually, the first article that I published on was about condom use among particularly individuals living with HIV. So I'm very, thinking about my own journey into research and some of the nuances in terms of behaviors. And I'm thinking, you said at the time there were not a lot of papers that kind of spoke about these nuances. And just for time and framing, I wonder what year this may have been around. And then
this was like about 2000, maybe 2002, 2003.
Okay. So
yeah.
So around that time, you have these questions. You had just been a nurse for 4 months, and now you are thinking about going for a PhD. Can you tell me what came to your mind in terms of potential barriers or fears about starting a PhD? Did you know much about what a PhD was, and what helped you to gain the confidence to apply for the PhD? Where did you go for your PhD, and what did you major in? Or what was the focus? Was it in nursing or something else?
I didn't really know what it was. I had a lot of mentors in public health when I was in nursing school. And I was working in a public health department as a nurse. So I was very familiar with public health principles from an academic standpoint, but was also familiar with public health practice from an applied clinical standpoint, because that's what my first job was after nursing school. So I knew it was going to be in some area of public health. I just kind of knew that's where it would be. I didn't know what a PhD meant. I had people who advised me, mentor faculty, who were suggesting that is what I needed to. The way they got me was, if you want to answer that question, here's what you need to do. So it could have been a RHD, it could have been any number of letters. It didn't really matter. What I wanted to do was get the answer to that question. And the folks said, if you want to be able to do that, then you have to take this path. And so I just said, okay, then I guess I'm taking that path, because I felt this sort of duty to be a more effective nurse in that clinic. And I felt like I couldn't do it if I didn't know how, if I didn't have evidence to support the sort of advice or clinical guidance I was going to be offering to the people I was seeing. So I studied, and I planned to study community and preventive medicine. That's most of the folks who have been mentioning me at that point were in that department. But someone convinced me to go into nursing, to get a PhD in nursing. And so that's what I studied. It was a very interdisciplinary PhD. You know, my mentor was one was a sociologist, one was an anthropologist, my committee, an anthropologist who worked in community preventive medicine, a sociologist who worked in nursing, and a women's health nurse practitioner who was a PhD in nursing. So that's sort of how I learned research through those people. And it was grounded in nursing, but it was very interdisciplinary because the people who were guiding me on this journey were from different disciplines.
Wow, thank you. This definitely sounds like a very nice group to work with, as you mentioned, interdisciplinary. And I'm curious to know what the name of the school you went to, because of, you know, it sounds like you had a great experience with the team.
Yeah, I went to University of Rochester. Actually, I did my undergraduate and my graduate degrees at University of Rochester in upstate, in Western New York.
And were you able to answer the question during your PhD training? And what other, you did? So what did you find, just out of curiosity, if you
found that it's complicated. Yeah, no, it is complicated, but you know, essentially what we learned is that the girls did not really have sort of sophisticated, well-developed communication tools to communicate with the fathers of their children. These are 15-year-olds, right? Many of these people, they're folks who they dated for a short time. Some they had sex with one time and then they're pregnant. And they didn't know, there was no other way to understand how you relate to this guy. It was through sex. And like that was their frame of reference for how you connect with this particular person, almost consistently. And what we found is that they weren't even really interested in the man per se, in the guy. What they were interested in was a relationship between the father and the child. That was the reason they stayed connected to this person so persistently, even though they had boyfriends, even though the guys had other partners or maybe had a girlfriend or whatever it might be, could be a boyfriend, but they stayed connected, not because they had this serious, you know, enduring, intimate interest in him as a sexual partner or romantic partner, but because they wanted that connection between their child and the father to be active, right? The challenge was they didn't really know how to do that. The mechanism they thought they had to do to make that happen was through sex. And reducing any type of tension that might come through sex, including insisting on condom use, in ways that you could probably do with your boyfriend. You could tell your boyfriend, no, we're using condoms or we're not doing anything, because the implications of your boyfriend leaving are different than the implications of the father of your child saying, I'm upset with you. And so we learned that this was not even about a sexual encounter that the women wanted. This was about them trying to find ways to build connection without having tools or some other framework to understand that outside of this, the initial sort of encounter, which was the sex. Yeah. And so we had to find other ways to support. Once I understood that, and I could write about it and then tell my nursing colleagues about it, it just shaped the way we responded in the clinic, right? So instead of saying, you know, girl, you can do better than that, drop him, he's no good, look at you, you're in here, you might have STD, you know, he's seeing other women, go on with your life. That's what we thought. That was the wrong thing to do, because what we were doing was forcing disconnection. And what my dissertation learned is that these women wanted connection. So what we had to do was figure out a way to get them that connection that they wanted, that did not sort of necessitate them exposing themselves to potential STI if they want to have sex, right? But there's another way. So now we say, what do you want out of this relationship? What do you want to get from this relationship with this guy? What can we do to help you figure out a way to do it? And then some might say, I don't want him at all. I just want my daughter to see her dad. Or, okay, well, right. So let's work on that. Let's get you treated for this STI. And let's think about some ways that you might be able to sort of have that connection made, which didn't occur to me in those 4 months I was doing it. But it wasn't until I did a dissertation to help me understand, ask that question of girls themselves and really explore enough to help me understand we're doing it all wrong.
Yeah. And I think in one scenario, one person could say, well, you could have just asked those questions when you were as a nurse, but as a, I think the training, the PhD training allows us to also think about the kind of questions to ask, because sometimes we ourselves don't know what kind of questions to ask. We know there's a problem, and we can make assumptions, but we may not have the questions and multiple questions. So I think that's probably what happened for you doing this long PhD program that, I don't know if you had, 3 to 4 years or however many years, but it is a process that really, it's not an easy process, but you went through it, you learned, and you were able to make a change in the setting that you ultimately were in before you went for the PhD. And since completing your PhD, you have done so much. You have accomplished so much. You are an associate dean at Yale University. And I'm curious, and I know I may not be able to really capture all of that journey, but I'm curious to learn if you could maybe walk us through finishing your PhD, learning all these great information and making an impact in that clinic, to now moving on to these other opportunities that may have opened up for you, or that you may have pursued. Maybe you had additional questions. So what happened? What happened after you finished your PhD? And
I became an assistant professor,
so right away you went from PhD to assistant professor.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Many people do postdocs. I didn't do a postdoc. I was being recruited out of nursing school, so I could have done it, but there were already, at least at the time, there were many nursing schools who would take me right out of my PhD program, and I was ready to start there. And so I did that. I taught, which was amazing. I taught at the University of Toronto in Canada, and that was my first job. So I did that, and I think what it helped me do was to expand my mind. Even though the PhD program was really good at helping me think differently about the world and think more critically about the world, I think being in a different cultural context like Toronto, which is also an amazing university that they have, helped me also think a bit more in sophisticated, more global ways about the work I was trying to accomplish. So I did that. I moved to University of South Florida from Toronto, which was my first opportunity to have a leadership role in academia. I actually knew I wanted it in Toronto because when I was in my PhD program, I was actually deputy director of a health department. So I already had leadership experience. I had managed big budgets. I had overseen hundreds of people. So I went from that to being an assistant professor, which is sort of the lowest person on the ladder. And it wasn't as fulfilling as I wanted it to be. I got to a point where I needed to sort of flex my leadership muscle. And I was even in the military. I mean, I served before I even went to nursing school. So I knew there was another part of me that needed to be exercised that wasn't happening. So I went to University of South Florida and became assistant dean for community and international affairs. And that was just a chance to allow me to offer what I knew I could contribute. And the dean there saw it and she said, we want everything that you're bringing. And so it allowed me to sort of get a taste of what that looks like in an academic environment, which is different from, a public health policy environment in government. But I enjoyed it. I still maintain my teaching. I still maintain my research program. And I then moved from there back to the University of Rochester, but as a faculty member this time. And I became associate director of our Center for AIDS Research at Rochester. I was in charge of international affairs for that CFAR. And that worked well because I was already doing global HIV work research at that time. And so it really capitalized on my interest in global affairs. I could leverage my connections and my experience to help other faculty develop what they were trying to build for themselves. And then from there, I move on to Yale to do similar work, but the scale is a bit broader because it's not just focused on global HIV work, it's focused on global health work, health research, and the health of the planet. And I think we talked about this before we started this interview, but I think there was a part of me early on that was really interested in developing other scholars, junior scholars, and even mid-career scholars. And I think that's what you have to have an interest in to go into leadership positions. It's not about sort of building up LaRon's portfolio anymore. I needed to still do that for myself, but it really was, what can I offer to help build the capacity and the career trajectories of the faculty who work here, right? Or the students who come here to study, or the postdocs who are preparing for a transition into an independent academic career. So I got really interested in that. And I think that's why I stayed in leadership roles. And when I moved to Yale, I'd already known if they said, this is a faculty position, then that's it, I probably wouldn't have taken it because I wanted to be in a position where I could be having some impact at the school level and continuing to offer what I could in terms of helping develop other faculty into expanding their work into the global sphere.
Thank you. I think this is very helpful to understand your passion for your leadership roles that you have pursued over the years. And just to really go back, you shared the experience you had in the public health department as a deputy director, correct? Right.
Yes.
So that gave you a good experience as a leader. But then you transition to assistant professor position at University of Toronto, doing your research, maybe mentoring a few individuals. But then you apply for an assistant dean right from assistant professor before you had received tenure at University of Toronto?
Yeah, I didn't have tenure. Yeah.
So you didn't have tenure. How long were you at University of Toronto? Maybe 2 to 3, I don't know, 4,
3
5.
years. I
Huh?
was at 3 years.
Sorry?
3 years.
3 years. Okay. So how do you convince someone, I mean, I'm sure you did and it worked, but what were you able to sell to become the, to the dean at University of South Florida, as an assistant professor who had not received tenure, to now hire you as an assistant dean for faculty affairs, you mentioned, and community
and international affairs.
Community and international affairs. And I'm just curious, like if someone is watching and they are interested in applying for an assistant dean position, I know times are different, but like what worked for you in that process, and just to kind of hear, how do you prepare for that?
Yeah, I think I'd already had a little bit of a reputation for my leadership, and it wasn't always, the top of the org chart type leadership, but my ability to engage people and communities and to mobilize to get stuff done. I think folks had seen that. Folks had kind of known I was somebody who was good at diplomacy and had a knack for inspiring people to make things happen. And so I was really able to, I think to understand that I had that ability was important. I didn't always understand that I had it. And then to communicate that to this next dean who was trying to recruit me and wanted to know, what is it going to take? Excuse me, what is it going to take to get you to move to Florida? And that's what I communicated. Here's what else I bring. And here's what I would want to do if I came to your school. And I think it convinced her.
Okay, Perfect. And what were your responsibilities, for example, as an assistant dean at University of South Florida? I know as an assistant professor, when I was an assistant professor not too long ago, I did my research, I mentored a PhD student, and then I also taught a course and had some service. So that was it. But as an assistant dean, what are these additional activities and responsibilities? What were there for you at that stage?
So there was a couple things. One was really about engaging the community members, right? Being an ambassador for the school, finding out what the community's priorities and needs were, and then figuring out with the dean and leadership team, how we as a school were responding to those priorities, right? We got a lot from the community. They were our patients. We practiced with them when we needed simulated patients. And so we also want to have a school that was responsive to what the local needs were. So part of my role was to sort of be visible and to be listening and trying to figure out what's the pulse of what's going on here, and how is the work that we're doing aligned with what's happening in the communities around Tampa, which is where I was at the time. And then the other component was focused on international affairs, which also included military affairs. And it included fundraising. Fundraising meaning many schools operate with, as a business model, and we need to find what could we do to help the school be sustainable. Some of that was having relationships with people who created and that would generate an affinity for the school. I like that guy Nelson. I like what they're doing over there at South Florida. Like let's invite them over to the next gala, and let's see what we can do to help move what they're doing forward. Right. That wasn't always the end game, right? But that was also part of what these relationships were about, is people who had means, who if you could get them to understand the ways in which you were moving and the school was moving, was aligned with their interests, it could generate support, right? Where they could call on other people to support initiatives that we had. So that was a lot of what we did. The other part of that was in my international affairs role was I set up these international field experiences or clinical experiences for our students. One was in Panama, South America, one was in Scotland, and one in St. Croix. So those, again, it was about how do we enhance the educational experience of the students, but it was also what can we create, what product can we create that can also generate revenue for the school that isn't just dependent on tuition or dependent on grants, but can we offer something that people will invest in, pay for, that can help create sustainability for the school. So that was a lot of what I did: relationship building, finding ways to generate revenue, finding ways to make sure the school was aligned with the community's interests, which was a lot of all that was incredibly fun, challenging and at points, but never boring. And most of the time it was a lot of fun.
Yes, just listening to it, I'm thinking I want to be an assistant dean for community international affairs, because I'm already engaged in providing opportunities for students to go abroad as a faculty, a researcher, but I'm finding that that's not necessarily what I'm hired for. So I'm creating these opportunities on my own because that's my interest. That's how I became interested in global health. But perhaps if there's a position that will actually pay you, or at least this is your responsibility and you have to do this as part of that role, I think it makes sense to explore it, because I'm interested in this very much. So thank you for sharing that experience and kind of provide concrete examples of what you did as an assistant dean at University of South Florida, and then you now left University of South Florida to go to University of Rochester for another leadership position while still carrying out your research. And I'm curious to know, as you are making these transitions from assistant professor to assistant dean, and then another leadership position and now new leadership, in that process, how did your research also evolve between South Florida and Rochester, and what were you also able to leverage these leadership positions to also inform your research? Because sometimes I hear advice that if you take these leadership and administrative roles, then your research will suffer. You won't be able to really perform and have the productivity that would allow someone to be tenured and be promoted to full professor. And in your case, you've been able to do all of it and still be promoted. So what helped you in that process?
You know, it is definitely not easy to try to balance both, to be an effective administrator and also a productive scientist. So that was a challenge for me. I think when I got to Rochester and I was working with the CFAR, I mean, that was age research. And my role was international age associate director of international research. And that's what my research was. So it made it a lot easier for me to get things done because I wasn't really split between two minds.
Okay.
Work I was doing and the CFAR to create an environment to facilitate international research, I also got a chance to benefit from it because my research was also an international. Um, Identifying faculty, right? So when we identified new faculty, you think about people who can add to what exists. Part of that was that I do HIV research in Ghana. Like if we can find faculty who do, and so do other people. But if we can find faculty who also do work in West Africa, we can build a community of scholarship here. So being in a leadership role gave me this sort of, 100-foot view of sort of what it was and allowed me to sort of move chess pieces. Mostly it was for other faculty. Like, what do we need to do to make sure that, a Donaldson or LaRon or whoever can be successful. But I could also look and say, okay, you know what, actually, that space might work for me too. So if we can bring in these 3 people or put them in these departments, or if we fund these pilot grants, like here's the way that it can benefit the institution as a whole. And so I think because I was in that space, my research never suffered. It didn't slow down per se. And I think the similar, there was also a freedom at Rochester, I guess I'll say. Some of what happens is that when you take these administrative roles, sometimes the leaders see you as staff, right? You're on call, they call you anytime, they give you 100 different things to do, and that can bog you down. Because when you're on the team, like when you're the number 2 or number 3 or number 4, like you got to respond to what your dean or your department chair is asking you to do. All that stuff can take away time from your research. The place where I was, it was very supportive of my autonomy. As a matter of fact, this theory I use in my work, self-determination theory, was developed at University of Rochester, and I learned it there. And I think in the medical school, they teach the medical students in that way. And our CFAR was in the School of Medicine. It was a collaboration with nursing and medicine, but it was housed in medicine. And I think they practiced it. It was really about these people who work here will do the best if we get out their way and just provide them with support, make sure they know they have autonomy to pursue what interests them most. And let's just make sure they have what they need. And that also meant not bogging me down with 1,000 administrative matters when I needed to develop and build a research program. So I think that environment was, it felt unique. Hopefully it's not too unique because we will hope or other universities operate the same way. But it really was an environment that allowed me to do as much as I needed to do to feel effective as a leader, but also as much as I needed to do to be a productive researcher. They didn't handcuff me with so much administrative duties that I could not do what I needed to do. I think they trusted. We brought this guy on, he's talented, he's experienced, let's let him do what he needs to do, how he needs to do it. And that was golden. I think if anything was a recipe, that was the recipe. Is going someplace where not where you just sort of fly free, but where there is trust and belief in your ability to do what needs to be done, and there's support to help you do what you're trying to do. And that's what I had at Rochester, which allowed me to still make progress on both those fronts.
Wonderful. And how many years were you at University of Rochester? If you roughly
5 years.
5 years. And
yeah.
As I mean, it's enough to just be in one university and have a research program, but you also had your research team in Canada throughout the time you were in University of Rochester building a space there. You had a lab. That's how, when I reached out to you back in 2016, I believe,
Mhm.
you were traveling from Toronto to Rochester, and Ghana and so many other places. So before we go to Yale, like, how did you maintain the Canada research team even when you were in South Florida, in Tampa, and then just continuing the teamwork there when you went to Rochester, or did you start back up? Like, just sharing
Mhm.
that a bit,
I
because it's
mean, it's a
amazing.
good question, insightful question. I maintained my connections in Toronto when I left because I was there for 3 years. So all of my research post PhD was in Canada. So I couldn't just sort of let that go because that's all I had at that point. So I kept that, but I didn't have a robust research team. I had my community partners who I continue to publish with. We continue to think through different ideas, but I wasn't very active during the 40 years. But Rochester is only a few hours from the Canadian border and an hour more from Toronto where my research was. And so when I moved there, I quickly, got um, the team back started in Canada, which again, some people would say, well, you're in Rochester now, you should build a team in Rochester and do your research here. But Rochester was not that type of place where they
Mhm.
dictated that I had to do my research locally. They were fine with me having a program in Toronto. As long as it was funded, I could get funding for it. I was publishing, it was high quality. Like that's what mattered. Where I did it wasn't of concern to them. And I think they knew that in order to keep me somebody who they recruited, so I think they saw value in me, and they needed to allow me to do what I needed to do, which was really invest my time and resources into building that team in Toronto, which exists today. I still have that lab, even as I have one there and one in Ghana, and work in the U.S. too. But
Yes, and excitingly, I believe we, including me, as the team in Canada, we submitting a grant next week. I believe Michelle contacted me, so I'm very excited about to be part of that team for like
yeah.
at least 5 years now, and having had a chance to visit and meet the team and learn so much and grow. So it's one thing to talk about the team, but it's another thing to also have been there and witness the vibrancy of the team in Canada and in Toronto. So I'm excited for this grant, and hopefully it will be funded so I can be part of the great work you're doing in Canada. So now I'll just change gear a bit and go to Yale, because this is where you are now. You
Mhm.
again, you're very busy. You're working on multiple projects. You have an R1, and people. I'm very excited for the work you've been doing in Ghana with this R1. But then you have the HPTN 096 protocol. That for those who don't know, HIV Prevention Trials Network is one of the largest network that funds HIV clinical trials that have provided great evidence on how the HIV field has evolved. And you have been awarded one of these large protocols. And I mean, this is not the focus, but I just want to highlight these amazing projects. But now you're the associate dean. How have your experience and responsibilities changed while still having even more research projects and larger teams, and still having to deliver on your passion as a leader and wanting to have this kind of impact?
I think Yale is a very different institution, so that the culture is different. So that is, uh, it's changing sort of the volume of interest that you get. It's almost like it's not spam, but like everybody wants in, right? Wants to be connected or wants to be doing something with the university or with our school. So I spend a lot of time triaging opportunities, and some are great opportunities. Well, I've had to, instead of being open and think, oh God, oh gosh, we got this opportunity and we can do something with this place, which is great. Like I've had to be more deliberate and choosy about saying no, no. I say no a lot, because we are looking for partnerships. They don't have to be big. They don't have to be expensive. They have to be meaningful, and they have to contribute to uh, what I would say improving life on the planet. And I'm not even saying that in a trivial way. I mean, improving life on the planet. Like if it's not doing that, we're less likely to even sort of be interested in it at all. And I've not been in a position to for the world to come to you for answers the way I think it happens now. And then to be in a position to tell really smart, really big companies or people or institutions that you have to pass on a great opportunity that they're proposing, because my goal is to take the assets we have, which are our brilliant students, our gifted, brilliant faculty, and figure out a way to strategically maximize that intellectual effort that's really going to have impact on the world. And so that I haven't done that, I have not had to do that, or had the opportunity to do that before. Also, the focus is across all health domains within nursing, for example. So my expertise in it is in HIV, but I work with folks who do cancer research, who do sleep, who do pain, who study neuroinflammatory biomarkers. So I've had to really expand the scope of how I understand the faculty's research, and then still figure out a way to maximize all these different things that are even outside the scope of my own expertise. So that is different. But I think that is an evolution of my leadership, is not feeling like I have to know every detail about every clinical or scientific topic, but I know how to understand what people need, how to read the need, and how to make sure they can get the support that they need to advance their interests as individual faculty, but also the interests of my school and the university at large.
Wow, thank you. That definitely sounds different from what you described from the previous two leadership positions you had. And I'm curious if you are able to provide like an example of a partnership that you were able to say yes to, and how this potential partnership can have the impact on the world, as you mentioned that your goal is.
Okay, let me see. One partnership, I will say, there's an organization called WCEA. I think it's World Continuing Education Alliance. And, so maybe a week before, there was a royal family who wanted to give a lot of money to build a hospital. We were like, that's a lot of money, but what's the need for this hospital in this place? There wasn't really a need. They just wanted a nice hospital with their family's name on it and Yale's name on it. And it was a lot of money, but that's not what we're doing. We're not doing that, right? It's not going to make the type of impact we need to make. So this other group, WCEA, came through, startup-ish kind of group, but they are taking content from faculty around the world, Johns Hopkins, University of Washington, other places, and they're repackaging that content in this and making it available to nurses in low and middle income countries, right? So you don't have to come to Hopkins or George Washington or Yale to study this. If this alliance can get faculty to donate content, and they can read whatever they do to it to make it accessible through this mobile app, and then work through ministries of health, right? Not nursing, not an individual nurse's account, but ministries of health, nursing regulatory bodies and midwifery regulatory bodies, to say you can push this out to all the people that you license in your country. And so that's reaching millions of people, millions of nurses across the world. So that was of interest to us. We thought we could partner with this. It's not going to bring us to revenue, but what it will do is allow content that we can do, that we come up with, partner with this alliance who can repackage it and make sure nurses all over the world who in all parts, countries I don't even know, can have access to it. Because we could see the impact that would have if you didn't have to travel to New Haven to learn this, because you couldn't afford it, or it was too far, or whatever reason, that you could have access to sort of high quality, top-notch clinical education information at the tip of your fingertips. And that is, it's vetted, not vetted, not, it's endorsed, because the nurses aren't getting it from a Facebook ad or from a, the place that licenses them is saying, hey, here's an opportunity for you to do this that you don't have to pay for, and here's where the content is from. And they showed us that in 6 months, I'm going to get the number wrong, but it was at least 1 million nurses had signed up and had completed. So they were tracking where they were, what country they were in, what modules they signed up, when they completed it, how long it took. So we were seeing that there was demand for it. People were taking it up. And so we said, this is not a moneymaker for us, but this is impact focused work. We're interested, and that was a partnership we took. Even as we turned down a partnership that would have otherwise been very lucrative and attractive to many places, but it would not have had the type of impact that we wanted to have. And that's an example I can think of right off.
Thank you. I was thinking that may have been a little difficult, because I'm sure there's so many opportunities we've had to screen and maybe also approve. But thank you for sharing that and providing a very concrete example. And I'm also mindful of the time, and I'm just very interested in what are some of the key points you would like to perhaps share about what it means to be a dean, maybe to an assistant or an associate professor who's thinking about, exploring becoming a dean or an assistant, associate dean or a dean in general. What would be some key takeaways you think you could share that could be that should be considered?
Sure, it's not luxurious. I think people believe that it is. There's more power in it, but it is a tough job. Dealing with humans who have different interests, often competing interests, is difficult. I think you have to be very careful. If you're somebody who is thirsty for power, you can probably get a dean job, but you're probably not the right person for the job. Because I think what it does is it feeds your ego in ways that I think lead people to be more self-centered and not attuned to the needs of the people that they're supposed to be serving and building. That's a lot of who ends up in these jobs, because that's who wants them. The people who will be best at them aren't really interested in that, right? The nurturers, the problem solvers, the connectors, they want to be nurturing and connecting. They don't want to be in a, but that's who we need. And so I think if you're a person out there who is someone who likes to connect people, who thinks about how you build faculty, who likes mentoring and support, consider a leadership role, because it is for you. Even though you may not see yourself in that way, I invite you to see yourselves in that way, because I think we need more people who are like you. And then I guess the third one would be, it's an incredible responsibility that I think at times I didn't always give myself, I don't know if it's imposter syndrome or not, but I knew I could do it, but there was something that was sort of holding me back from sort of leaning into it. Like I'll be hesitant. And so I had to learn to really trust that I know what I'm doing, that I am, that I'm smart enough to do it, that I'm skilled enough, and that other people who are in these roles, or even higher roles, doesn't mean they're even more skilled than me. That's not always how people end up in these leadership positions, because it's based on merit. And it took me a while to realize that. And I think once I did, I was more confident in my leadership. I questioned myself less often, always reflective, but not really questioning myself about what it was that I was doing. Like I knew that even if somebody else had a different path, I would say, okay, I hear how you want to do that. Here's what I'm doing. And being confident in that, because I think that slowed me, that I could have, I think by this point, I could have had different types of impact and maybe more advanced impact if I believed in myself earlier on. And it took me some time to get there. And there was no reason for it. And so I tell people, and I'm telling you, believe in yourself now. You didn't get here by chance. You didn't get any breaks. Like, you're here because you are what we need. You are the best of the best, and you're just as good as anybody else. But you have to believe it. Being it is one thing, right? But you have to believe it and you have to act on it. And that's something that I didn't always do. And if I had to do it again, I would. That is the advice I would give myself. But it's the advice I freely give to you, because I think it is what keeps a lot of us from advancing in ways that we're clearly qualified for.
Wow. That was amazing. I feel like I was in church, and the pastor's calling and say, if you believe, this is your moment. And I really, I feel like you're talking to me. And so many others, I hope, feel that you are talking to them and you are able to inspire them, as you have done for me. Before you even became a dean at Yale, you've been a very nurturing and inspirational individual. You responded to my cold email. You didn't know me. You responded, and you took me under your wing, and you've been able to really guide me and support me along the way. So I really believe in what you say. So thank you very much for making the time to share your journey on this platform. I would really encourage anyone who's watching, please, subscribe to our channel, reach out and ask questions and be inspired and believe in yourself. That's really, I think, really the message, as toward the end that you shared, Dr. Nelson. You can do it. Believe in yourself. And on that note, take care, everyone.